Well, I'm
Okay.
we're just going to wing it.
I'm good with anything.
You did.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Oh, cool. Okay. Well, well, thank you so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate this. We're pretty excited. This is Battery Earth's one of our first events in person. We've done some Zoom events and things like that. Yay! In case you don't know, we have a mission now. And our mission is to promote collaboration in addressing the environment and social challenges to sustain life on Earth. So we're pretty serious, but we're pretty fun. So tonight, I'm really excited to, Tanya could not make it, but Eric Kuzman is here from the San Francisco Zoo. He is the general curator. And then Dr. Scott Sampson is here from the California Academy of Sciences. And I'll do a little bit of an intro, but I wanted to tell you kind of what the overview of what we're going to do. We thought what we'd do is just kind of have a short conversation, well, up here about half an hour, 45 minutes. And then what we want to do is open it up to the floor for questions. Because one of the things we really wanted to do with Battery Earth is really connect people, ask questions, form collaborations, spark ideas, and things like that. And then maybe we'll end around 8:15, so you can come up and meet everybody individually when you have time. So I'm very lucky because I have known Eric, I think 25, 30 years. We met we were working for the Smithsonian at the National Zoo, and he was working with bats, and I was studying migratory birds. And he's been with the San Francisco Zoo for how long now?
I've been there close to 25, almost 24 years.
24.
I can't remember.
How old is the San Francisco Zoo, too? It's like a...
San Francisco Zoo recently had their 90-year. Sorry, San Francisco Zoo recently had their 90-year anniversary, and we're looking forward to our 100-year in like 5 or 6 years. But yeah, 90 plus years.
Wow.
And it was a fly shacker, the fly shacker zoo when it first started, and had the fly shacker pool, which I'll mention later.
Yeah.
But
So how many people have been to the San Francisco Zoo recently? Okay. Are you still doing Boo at the Zoo?
it's a less of a Boo at the Zoo.
Oh, okay.
I think they're doing some. I have
Some
recently
kind of
saw they're
trick-or-treating, put you on the
doing
spot.
a costume evaluation, and there you go.
'Cause
Sorry,
when,
sorry about that. Yeah,
I
I'm
actually
getting waved at by this.
I actually got to work.
So I'm not used to a mic thing, so it's where I am. But yeah, Boo at the Zoo, we used to do a big thing with that, and now it's kind of an abbreviated aspect of that. But we have people coming in costumes, and we're judging costumes, mostly little kids doing that. So.
Yeah. And it used to be really fun when I worked there. They had restrictions on the costumes too. Adults could not wear them because you really would scare the animals.
Yeah, no, we have restrictions, and certain things do throw the animals off, but I don't think they're doing that this year. Balloons is the big thing that the animals don't like.
No, they were. And then I just want to introduce Dr. Scott Sampson. He's been the executive director of the California Academy of Sciences since September 2019. The Academy of Sciences, when was the last time you all were there? Anybody there recently? California Academy? On their Thursday nights. They've started back up, right?
Yep.
Yay. Yeah. The Academy of Sciences is a world-class museum. It includes programs in scientific research on sustainability and education. And some of you may also know him as Dr. Scott, the paleontologist, an on-air host for the Emmy-nominated PBS television series, The Dinosaur Train. He is a highly regarded for his expertise in the late Cretaceous, is that right?
Cretaceous.
My mother was talking about dinosaurs from the theropods in Madagascar to the horned dinosaurs in North America. So I have a question for you all. What do you think is more attended? Or more attendees go to? Would it be the zoos and museums and aquariums, or to major league sports events? Surprise, no. It is more people attend the zoos and aquariums and museums. And what's interesting is it's more than major league sporting events together and theme park visitors. So what is also exciting is that people trust museums and zoos and aquariums more than they trust, obviously, the news and the news sites, federal agencies, and things like that. So not to put any pressure on our guests, but what we wanted to ask both of you was, what kind of responsibility do you feel about either talking about climate change or raising that issue with your visitors? And if you are doing that, what are you doing? We'll kind of go from there. Do you want to go first, and then Scott?
Sure, I'll go first. I would say that people that come to zoos, our San Francisco Zoo, or my experience with zoos in general, is that it's the experience of being, there's a connection between people and animals in that situation. And it's not just climate change that that people experience that aspect of going into zoos and going through things and walking through and seeing things, but it's just that connection of seeing an animal and doing things where a lot of people do not get to do, walk through the woods or go to Antarctica or wherever it is. A lot of people get to experience that first experience with being next to an animal or doing stuff with animals is within a zoo or an aquarium. We have tons and tons of young kids that come through that get to experience things. And I've seen this experience for over 35 years in my career. And it's just that amazing thing where people get to see and come in contact with animals. And that's their first experience. And that was actually my first experience. I remember when I was 3 or 4, I went to the Philadelphia Zoo and got on an Aldabra tortoise or whatever it was. I can't remember exactly the species. And that's why I loved animals so much, because I got that experience. And I know that people connect and do that with animals. And it's not just climate change that they go through. Our learning aspect, it's just that learning aspect of what the world is all about. And that connection where you experience those things. So it's gone, my whole career has been going through that experience of teaching people about, we don't pull animals from the wild anymore. We breed animals in captivity. We promote conservation and the saving of wild habitat for animals and doing those sort of things. And it's just come to the point. It's come to the point where at this point where it's so important to get people to understand the importance of getting people to understand what it means and how important that those spaces are that we're saving. And those spaces are actually changing environmentally. And then to save those aspects of that is incredibly important to think about that. Does that help?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just,
Yeah, because I've been at the zoo, and I've been there when a little girl saw her first tiger and she just started to shake and scream. And I think that's what, when we talk about climate change and people are like, oh, we're going to lose biodiversity, we're going to lose these animals. It's not a direct feeling, but for people that have been and had that emotional connection to zoos or they've been able to see the animals, they care more, and they're more they care more about what's happening to the world as a whole. Scott?
well, there's a famous one last thing, but there's a famous saying: you don't care about what you don't know about.
So first things first, the Academy is hosting a Halloween party next week, live in person, and we're pretty close to sold out. It's called Supernatural, but normally we tell people you can't wear masks, which is interesting, but this year everybody has to wear a mask, which is kind of bizarre, but that is our reality this year in this strange and bizarre time we find ourselves in. So I just want to start by thanking you all for being here this evening. Even meeting in person is kind of strange still for us. So with regard to the notion of climate and museums, I mean, the reality is this is the most pivotal moment in 300,000 years of human history right now. the decisions that we make in the next decade will determine not just the next decade after that, or the next century, or the next millennium, but potentially hundreds of thousands of years after that. So we have this moment where we can step up and take action. And just a few years ago, climate was struggling to get into public consciousness. Scientists have known about this for 40 years and have been screaming it, but it wasn't reaching public consciousness. And then, interestingly, it was the marriage with social justice through the Sunrise Movement. If you remember, they invaded Nancy Pelosi's office and took over, and all of a sudden we had this marriage between social justice and climate took off. And now we're seeing it as one of the top issues that people talk about. What's not up there yet is what Eric was talking about, and that is the web of life, what we like to call biodiversity, and everybody else hates that word. And really, you can't solve one without solving the other. Somebody used the metaphor, I think it was in the New York Times last week, that if you've got a car with a dead battery and a flat tire, you can't just fix one of them. You got to fix both. But in this case, it's even more interesting because arguably the best way to address climate is through three things. One, transitioning off fossil fuels to go to renewables. Two, reinventing the food system, because 1/3 of all emissions come from the food system, and the food system directly impacts life on Earth for all kinds of reasons. Think about clearing the Amazon for beef production. And number three action we need to take is restoring ecosystems, because of course we try and invent machines to capture carbon, and we have utterly failed after decades of working on this. And we're nowhere near where we need to be. And by far, the best technology we know of to capture carbon from the atmosphere is Mother Nature. And so if we can restore ecosystems, then we can pull carbon from the atmosphere, and we've got a shot at really keeping the temperature, the warming, below 2 degrees Celsius average, and maybe potentially even 1.5 degrees Celsius. So at the museum, we take this very seriously. We're trying to weave in the web of life with climate, and we see them both as deeply interconnected, and the food movement. And I would say, and we can go into this more later if you want, but I would say the one big change is that museums traditionally have said they need to be neutral. We are the most trusted sources for science, even more than scientists and universities. And some people say, therefore, we should try and be neutral. But we believe, at least at the Academy, this is not a time to be neutral. We have to step up. Advocacy is now one of our top values at the organization. And so we're working to find all kinds of ways to advocate on behalf of people and planet. And I would argue then that we really need, you've probably heard the term intersectionalism. Social justice, climate, and biodiversity need to be interwoven. We have to solve for all three at the same time.
So it's exciting what everybody's doing and how to address climate change. But one of the things that we've discussed is how just depressing it can be. And we had an example from the Monterey Bay Aquarium that they had an exhibit called the Hot Pink Flamingos. And they were teaching people about climate change, and they were excited about the exhibit, but they ended up closing it because they just did not have paying attendees that wanted to go. And I think the challenge is being excited and hopeful about addressing climate change, and that there's still things that need to be done. I know a lot of people get depressed, as a lot of us do, but I think the more depressed you get, the more you should just be working harder, and you should realize that there's still a chance where there's still things that can happen. One of the things with the zoo that was exciting is that they have kind of an open zoo platform where they do have areas where the migratory birds still come, and I'll let you talk about that, and the living roof at the California Academy, so that there are places that the birds still have a place to go, that the insects and the bees. I think a lot of us have known about what's happening with the bees now too. So let you talk about that.
I think I'm up against, a former public speaker It had his own show. And I think I'm going for my own show after this. So I would say that one of the things that I've done in my life has been to just try to do something. And there's this aspect of just try to do one thing. If you try to do one thing, everyone tries to do one thing, and then tomorrow do another thing. So the zoo has this aspect of we have invasive species elimination. We've gone through some of our own dunes where the ice plant grows, which is from actually not California, and eliminate that and try to get other species to grow that are naturally occurring along the coast. What's kind of interesting is that all of the Sunset, all of Golden Gate Park and the zoo was all dunes at one point. So it was just blowing sand, which is kind of an interesting thing to look at when you think about what's there now. So what's there now isn't really natural, but there are some things that are even more detrimental than others. So there's those sort of aspects, but to try to reintroduce and try to get some semblance of some natural processes that usually happen there to happen are interesting and are easy or sometimes hard to do. But it's an interesting thing to try to go through that and to say, okay, we've got natural birds that move through the area. We have a lot of predatory hawks and things that go through the zoo, and they're on their migratory route. And I've known them to feast on some different things throughout the zoo. I've seen them dive and get things out in our playground and things like that. Some bowls and things that happen. But but that's a natural process. And to try to encourage that or do that is kind of interesting, to try to have those sort of processes where you're trying to reintroduce things that normally happen that can't happen. And there are a lot of invasive species and there's a lot of things like that happen. But I would say that the zoo has an opportunity now with some of that realizing that we are one of the few zoos that has an oceanfront view. And we've actually had our back to the ocean for a long time. And now we're going to open up because the Great Highway at one point is going to be closed in front of the zoo, which is going to be traffic problems for everyone. If you've read the news about the Great Highway recently. But the fact that we can actually open up and look at and have a new view of the ocean and try to present that for people to see what is in your backyard. And I actually did a program down in Costa Rica where we went down and made dart frog and reptile and exhibits in San Jose, Costa Rica, to present to the kids in Costa Rica, what's in your backyard. And that's sort of what we're trying to do at the zoo too, is to look out and go, hey, this is our backyard. It's not just happening somewhere else, it's in your backyard.
So going back to the question about Monterey Bay Aquarium and creating these exhibits that people avoided, many museums and zoos and aquariums have done this. And it's almost like these exhibits have a force field around them that are keeping people out. People just don't want to go in there. And the reality is people go to zoos and aquariums and museums to have fun. They don't go to get big downers. And it speaks to a bigger problem that we're facing right now. It's pretty tough to spin this in a way that's positive. If I tell you that 1 million species on Earth may go extinct before the end of this century, and we're going to have ecosystems collapsing, and big parts of the planet won't be habitable anymore for people and many other species that live there right now. And now you just check how you're feeling right this moment. You're probably not feeling energized, right? Like that doesn't like get you happy and get you going. Like this is tough. And we're getting this all the time now in the news. And in many ways, like the really good news is that people are aware of these issues in a way they haven't been. There was a survey of thousands, tens of thousands of young people, and they reported that the number one issue that they think we need to move on is the ecological crisis on climate and life on Earth. That's the good news. The bad news is, and this came out of a study that came out a couple of weeks ago, 10,000 youth from 100 countries around the world, and they reported 56% of them said they think that we're doomed. That Earth is going down the tubes. We're like Thelma and Louise. We're going to drive off the cliff. So when you think about that, that's over half of those youth. And the danger, the real danger there is that if enough people believe it, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because nobody's going to act if they think we're doomed. It's like, hey, you might as well go have a beer and celebrate because, you know, we're going out the door anyway. So we have to find a better way to engage people. And I think there is a much, much better way. So at the Academy, we did something that I didn't even know was possible. Over the last year and a half, we did strategic planning via Zoom. And we defined a whole new purpose for the organization. And that purpose is to regenerate the natural world. Now, that might sound lofty, but the really interesting thing is, I said there's this short time frame for us to act. But the great news is we caused it. We know what to do to fix it. We don't need any more science or technology. We need to decide, act on it, and shift the culture enough to make it happen. Not that it's simple. There's politics and cultural inertia and fake news and all kinds of things to deal with. But we know what we need to do. We need to build a movement of people that care enough about this that they're going to act on it. So how do you build a movement? By inspiring people, by giving them a vision of a thriving future that is actually better than the present day, where life is thriving and people are thriving and there's far more social justice. We know how to do this. We're starting to do it now for the entire Bay Area. And we need to start thinking about this globally because every place is unique. There's not a person on Earth right now who could tell you what a thriving Bay Area looks like in 2050. Not one. Because in order to answer that question, you've got to take into account economics, population growth, ecology, climate change, social justice. We need to crowdsource the future. We need to have conversations about what a thriving future would even look like. And then we need to set a path on how to get there. And that future can't be drudgery and hard work and only. There has to be fun and enthusiasm and belly laughter. And we have to make this something that people are inspired to move towards. And we believe that we can play a role in doing that. So the Academy is not trying to do this on its own. We're doing this through deep cross-sector collaboration. And we think that that's by far the best way to do it. And when you think about picking a place on Earth to get this started, California and the Bay Area in particular is arguably the best place. When you think about the intellectual capacity here, the financial capacity here, the wonderful nature that's still preserved in the Bay Area, marine and terrestrial, this is a pretty great place to create an exemplar that could be duplicated around the world. And I'm currently having discussions with other museum leaders, the Field Museum in Chicago and the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in DC, and we're wondering about, could we shift the narrative together, create this regenerating Earth story that we share through our museums and aquariums and zoos to get people excited about the future and acting on behalf of it. And we think we can get there. And that is the pathway out of the flamingo paradox, where people just don't want to go in and see that. We need to give them an alternative. And right now, people don't know what that alternative is.
And I think hearing success stories. So that's why we had this tonight, because we're going to open it up to Q&A to figure out how we can do this, because we are in such an amazing city and such an amazing place. I started an organization, Marine Watch International, and what we were trying to do was simple, was just figure out who's out there doing what and how can we start sharing information and collaborate. And people were asking me, well, isn't that depressing going out there? I spend my weekends and my nights just combing through the internet, trying to find out who's doing what. And I honestly don't know why there's a problem. There are so many people that are out there. And I think one of the things, and this is just an honest conversation for us, is that I don't think we get to be depressed and get to feel sorry for ourselves, because I have seen organizations that are in the Southern Hemisphere that are losing their homes. And for me, conservation is a luxury. I have a vegan restaurant down the street. I have a roof over my head. I can worry about the environment. And I think that I have seen people that are standing up and risking their lives to save the environment. And I think that we should be backing them and doing everything we can to have their voices heard. And there are so many success stories. There are success stories about cleaning beaches, and 2 years later, the turtles are coming back. And that's what one of the things we say is, we can just slow this down. We can slow it down. Nature can take its course. We have a real opportunity. And I think we have an opportunity tonight in a place like this. And that's why if we're going to open up to questions, like I said, but if you can think about your networks and things like that, of how can we get this spark going, and how can we're already leaders in their field and the institutions here. And, but how can we take this to the next step and keep this being this innovative place? So on that note, I will open it up to questions for everybody. If people have questions to start, how they feel about the word climate change, climate crisis.
Right in the back, two in the back over here.
We've heard so much about endangered species, and yet there are signs of resiliency in different, animal communities. And I'm just wondering if you can sort of speak to the study of resiliency and what we can learn through that we can apply to our own lives.
You want me to do it? You want to do that?
You go first, since I've been going
Okay.
so first.
So it's a great question. And you could argue that resiliency is one of the most important things we need to be working for right now. You've probably heard about UN initiatives. It's like one's called 30 by 30, save 30% of the planet, water and land, by 2030, or half Earth, 50% of the planet by 2050. And the reality is, it's not enough. You can't just go and protect these places and say, our job is done, we've protected this nature, what's left? Because there's so many ecosystems that are either collapsing, like kelp forests along the California coast, or they're at the brink of collapse. So this is where this regeneration, rewilding, restoration needs to happen. And that's what builds resiliency. We know the planet's going to keep warming up for at least the indefinite future. And so that's going to make it tougher. Species are going to move, etc. So how do we build resiliency? Well, we have to look back in time, because we're looking at shadows of what these ecosystems are today, what they were even 200 years ago, let alone 10,000 years ago. So we have to think about bringing species back, increasing the population of species, making corridors and pathways so species can move northward as the climate warms, or they can move to higher elevation, etc. We're still going to lose species. That's just the nature of the moment that we're in. But we can do so much to build resiliency in ecosystems, land and sea, to make them better. So just to give one example of resiliency, marine protected areas are really phenomenal, because if you protect an area of ocean, you say no fishing in this area for a while, the fish tend to come back, and they come back so quickly that they spill out into the non-protected areas. So now the fishermen are getting better yield, better catches there. And so by creating marine protected areas in key spots, it builds resiliency in that spot. So really terrific question. And that's exactly the direction we need to go.
And if I had to add on to that, I would say that some of that resiliency, or trying to save endangered species, I would say there's absolutely no way we can save everything at this point. And I would say that's the downer. But if you look at, and I'm going to take some of your juice out of aquatic species, because I'm at the zoo and dealing with animals, but I know that there's a huge problem with coral reefs. And some of the resiliency they're talking about to save coral reefs is to get the resilient corals to regenerate and save some of the coral reefs. And that doesn't mean saving all of them. It means trying to save something in some areas and trying to do that. And with the corridors and what you talked about is very important. That was 20 years ago. I would say that some of the corridors were trying to just to keep the species, endangered species, in contact with each other. I can pull from my experience with red pandas that there's places where there are red pandas in certain bamboo forests, and they were trying to get them to move back and forth and to move through agricultural sectors to try to get them to go back and forth and try to keep some of that genetic material alive and do that. And now it's complicated by the fact that it might need to move up higher or out further. And it complicates our efforts, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And I think that's the important thing is and I look to it as just like it's a bigger challenge. So, and I'm up for the challenge. I know Scott's up for the challenge. And I know that the zoo and the aquarium are trying to support conservation efforts that are doing this. And it's all about partnerships with different people. And it's difficult to be partners with everyone, but it's about that. And I challenge all of you to pick up 2 or 3 things and challenge yourself with becoming a partner with somebody, or partner with not just the zoo, not just the aquarium, not just Nature Conservancy, but it's about it. Nobody's exactly right, but everyone's trying, and we all have to get together.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Eric said, because his point is really good. We can't save everything. So what should we do? Where should we concentrate our energies? And there are some people in conservation now who say we shouldn't be trying to save if a species is down to the last few animals. Maybe that's not where we should be investing our energies. Maybe it's about the health of ecosystems. And if you're looking at places, some places on Earth have more biological diversity than other places. We call them biodiversity hotspots. And in particular, they're coral reefs and tropical islands. More species have gone extinct in those 2 ecosystems than anywhere else. And more species are threatened in those 2 kinds of ecosystems than anywhere else. And that's why the Academy has taken on 3 projects. We've decided that we can't go broad and shallow. We're going to do 3 things and try and do them really well. One is tropical islands and looking at how to make them more resilient. 2 is coral reefs, and we have amazing researchers at the Academy. There's a woman named Rebecca Albright who's doing research on how to raise coral that's resilient to bleaching and all of that, and then put it back in the wild. And so we're looking at opportunities like that. And our 3rd project is California. And you may or may not know that California is a world-renowned biodiversity hotspot. We have far more life and diversity of life in this state than any other state in the US, at least in the 48, and actually even more in terms of species numbers than Alaska for sure. And so we have a responsibility to protect the life in this state as well. And so that's where we're really putting a lot of our energies too. So thank you. Sorry to.
Oh, no, the only other thing that I was going to add was that the reintroduction of animals. I know when we were at the National Zoo with the Smithsonian, they were reintroducing the black-footed ferret. So there are places and there are some animals that it has to behavioral issues and things like that, but we can put animals back. I used to work for the Marine Mammal Center, and those are they're saving pups and helping them get back into the ocean too. So those things are exciting.
And the only thing I'll add to that, it's more difficult to do that than save it initially. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. Okay, with 100 thoughts that have gone through my mind since I took the microphone.
Just 100?
I might need your help. Yeah. Okay, so in the context of climate justice, and you cited youth and the global South as being obviously in the forefront of this. It's our children who are going to be receiving climate injustice, as well as the peoples today who are on the front lines of this. And I'm grateful for you being here. The institutions that you represent were key to my growth, and my kids all went there. And the challenge I have to try to propose to you, first of all, is these institutions are representative of civilization, even colonialist civilization. And they stand for something that persists in the face of an older, outdated concept of nature. Now our kids pass through there. What lesson are they receiving? And if I want to just put forward a key goal here is teaching kids that they can become activists, that they can do this work, they can engage in this work, not just be pissed off like I was as a kid, but actually say, you know what, I'll pick this up, this is meaningful. What can happen at the zoos? So it's more than just, I mean, you're great entertainers, but how can you teach kids to become active and empower them?
You want me to go or you want to go?
I'll go first because I don't want to have to deal with the difficult part of this. I would say that that's exactly what our institutions are there places where people can learn and become activists. They can learn, just like you just said, there's an initiation of being able to be introduced to something of the natural world that in this world that I see now, and I have a son who's young, that it's all about computers, social media, and everything else. And the introduction and knowing that there's a world out there is even more important now than it was when you and I were kids. I mean, that's the most important thing, is to start that. And that's the value that I see in our institutions and museums, is that we just present the real thing. Granted, it's not 100% real, but you know, rhinos have a little bit more space than they have in the wild than they do in the zoo. But I would say that presentation that we were able to give excites kids and excites the youth to be able to see something and to start with something. How we go from there is something that I think we're both exploring and both doing. And that's the only thing that I know that I'm working on at the zoo, is trying to reconnect the zoo with the coast. And with us closing down the Great Highway and the park, the San Francisco County and Parks Department is putting a pathway, and they're going to try to excite people about being able to go down and see surfers, see the coast again. And we're going to piggyback on that and try to immerse people in the fact that this is their backyard. It's not just for surfers. It's like, that's you. That's, you know, we have an amazing marine environment around the Bay Area that has been rejuvenated. I mean, I actually have lived on a boat in Sausalito, and I've seen the water quality change because people care. And I think that's what I think that we just have to put the hope in our youth to do something. And what you've done with your kids is exactly what I see is a positive thing for that. I mean, it's just like, it makes me feel good that you took your kids and then they want to do something. I think you have to trust. You have to have some trust in that somehow to do that. And I just met Scott, and the fact that he had a TV show, or somebody's doing a TV show on something that excites kids. I mean, my son was just like wildcrats. My God, I went nuts with him, and the guys would say something about like, and I go, he's gonna talk about this. And my son would look at me like, oh my God, you know what they're gonna say? And I go, yeah, I've been doing this for a while. But just the fact that you know, all the youth can have some enjoyment and figure that out. I think that's where my hope is that they will take it like I took it, you took it, and everyone else. There's hope, I think, with that.
So first off, thank you for the question. It's a really good question, and it's a really hard question. Museums and zoos are colonial institutions. I mean, we go around the world, we pick up stuff and we bring it back here. It doesn't get much more colonial than that. And so we are now going through a long process thinking about, how do we decolonize the museum? What does that look like? And part of it is starting in our own house. addressing the diversity of our staff. And I spent 2 hours today on a call with a diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility group, a consultancy that we've hired that's working with our staff. We're looking to diversify our board, our volunteers, the students we have. If you look at evolutionary biology as a field or ecology, the numbers of students of color are about 3%. It's absolutely disgraceful. So we're taking on multiple levels with this. We're taking it on with our own organization. We are trying to scale environmental learning, and in particular working in underserved communities. So we have something called the Bayview Science Institute and Bayview Hunters Point, working with teachers. We're looking to build on that success and potentially extend that across the Bay to West Oakland, and work with those communities, not to try and come in and save them and figure out what they need, but listen to them about what challenges they have and then go and help them remove those challenges. Bringing back nature in those communities in ways that feel good to them and feel right to them. We're working on that. We're looking to diversify students at all levels that come to the academy. So we have an Academy for All program where students from throughout San Francisco can come for free. They don't need to worry about paying. But beyond that, we're looking to diversify graduates, university, undergrads, and graduate students and postdocs, et cetera. And when we're working in Madagascar, or the Galapagos, or the Gulf of Guinea, or the Philippines, we're also training youth in those countries. Because the reality is, we're not going to be there forever. And the colonial way of doing things is you go and you take stuff and you walk away. We can't do that anymore. So we're looking to train people in those countries that can do the conservation work, that can do the climate-based work moving forward. And so we're looking to build a whole cohort and potentially even collaborate with a series of museums to build this up so that students can move from one place to the other and really get the benefits. So your question's an excellent one, and it's a really hard one to get right, and we're doing our best on it. So thank you for asking that. That's really good.
And I was just going to throw in with the kids too. I think the important thing is that I think they know that the older generation has screwed up. And I think it's to empower them that obviously we screwed up, we don't have the answers, and we're doing everything we can, and to encourage them to come up with their own solutions and get out of the way. Because I think that we have a lot of bright ideas that are coming up.
There was a question over here. Oh, was there one here? Sorry.
Right here. As a citizen of the world's largest island and also one of the largest reefs, I appreciate the comments about the ocean. In the recent David Attenborough special that he did about the impact of COVID on the planet, there was an incredible amount of opportunistic and inspiring commentary about resiliency. And then there also was this hint about this incredible nexus that exists between water, food, and energy. Could you talk a little bit about what each of your institutions are doing to address that nexus, and then how that's going to impact conservation?
Yeah. You want me to jump in first here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's a really good question. And we're excited about directions that we could make a difference. And so let me give you one example. And it is from the island of Madagascar. And we have a scientist named Brian Fisher, who's worked for years studying ants in Madagascar, naming new species, looking at their behavior. And he noticed that the forests were disappearing, so the ants were disappearing, and all the rest of the lemurs and everything else were going away. And he said, you know, I'm an ant biologist. What the hell can I do? And he said, well, maybe, actually, I have the perfect expertise to address this. Because people in Madagascar, you may have heard that they're going through what is arguably the world's first climate famine. So southern Madagascar, there's hundreds of thousands to millions of people at risk, including just countless numbers of children. And really, a lot of it comes down to poor nutrition. So what Brian said was they're going into the forests to cut down trees to get firewood, and they're going to get bushmeat. They're killing lemurs and other animals to bring it out to eat it because there's no protein. What if we could raise insects that would be a protein source. And so he said, well, what would work? And he found a native cricket, and we've now begun cricket farming, and we're building a cricket farming factory in Madagascar. And you might think, well, okay, so that's a little bit of protein. Turns out the people love it. A lot of the people already eat insects. It's very high in protein. The ecological footprint is a fraction of what beef is. And now imagine if we scaled this across the southern hemisphere and ultimately the northern hemisphere, and we stopped cutting down forest for beef production. And that forest is critical. The Amazon is critical for climate. It's critical for biodiversity. If we can keep the forest intact, that also prevents us from going in there and hauling out viruses like COVID. So now we're decreasing the numbers of pandemics that are involved because people aren't going in for bushmeat, et cetera. So we're looking at solutions like that that are win-win-win-win solutions. They're good for human health and social justice. They're good for climate. That is for preventing the warming from going further out of control. They're good for biodiversity, keeping the rainforests intact, et cetera. So we see this as an example of a critical kind of project that addresses all of those concerns in a way that that I think it was Wendell Berry who said we have to solve for pattern, and that's exactly what this does. So thank you for that. I won't go on further, but.
Okay, I don't know if I can outdo that. I'm just trying to come up with an example that
Well,
would work.
Can I add a follow-up?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
You hinted on something there that I think is pretty interesting, which is the impact of, and you talked about your vegan restaurant, right? There is actually more protein in plants than there is in animals in a lot of cases, right? And it's one of the biggest misconceptions a lot of people have. If you think about it, gorillas are vegetarian, yet they can rip the cardboard off its hinges, right? Where do they get their protein from? Plants, right? And a bit of an advocate. But the interesting thing though is that the impact on the environment, as well as the amount of water that's consumed, as well as the whole ecosystem, is part of the reason why I didn't touch on the energy side. It's one of the things you think about in terms of the education for young children about that, because it's one of the biggest misconceptions out there.
Absolutely, and I don't disagree with that at all. And it all depends on, in these countries, what's available to the people in any given place. But as I said earlier, the food system is where we really need to reinvent how we do. We throw away half the food that we produce. We produce it extremely inefficiently. We need to get rid of industrial farming altogether and go to local-based farming. And it's been shown to be far more effective and still has high production yields, better for the soil, et cetera. So completely agree with you that most of us need to shift to a plant-based diet. That's just how it's going to be moving forward. So thank you.
And I think I need to address this way, that the Academy has a science-based number of people that come to the Academy, and the zoo has a different group of people that visit us, that visit the Academy, and it has to do with who can go where and what the cost base and things like that. And I think that what we try to do at the zoo is introduce those sort of things to try to maybe not push the whole big scientific aspect to that level, but at a different level, and maybe a lower level. And I don't want to say it's lower, but at a different level of trying to do that. We have aspects of the zoo where we're trying to introduce to people just basic common sense. We have places where you can recycle, places where you can do things like that. And it's not at that level of doing that, but I would suggest that there's a huge group of people out there, and you have to educate people at levels and to bring them up to a certain point. And I think that that's important to recognize with the political aspects of this country right now that I've dealt with, that you can try to educate some of the people some of the time, but you can't educate all the people to the same level all the time. And if that makes sense to you guys, then I suggest that that's what the zoo is trying to do. We try to do that at that level because we have a base of people that come in that are different in some levels. I don't. Can you
Yeah.
help me out with that?
Yeah, well, the one thing I want to say, we have a friend that used to work at Vallejo Six Flags.
Yeah.
So some people, they're just going to see the amusements and they just happen to see the animals. So they didn't necessarily go to even learn that. And then at the zoo, the interesting thing is that in the pouring down rain, parents were coming because they're like, my 3-year-old is screaming, they want to see a tiger. They're not worried about conservation. They're not worried about any other issues. Their kid wants to see the tiger and we're going to go see the tiger. And I think there's an entertainment value there too. And also it's outside and things like that. And I think that it's how do you massage in some of these concepts and some of these ideas. And some of the fun things too about this San Francisco Zoo is just that the animals there eat the food in San Francisco. And one of the interesting things about the koala bears is people don't understand animals are picky eaters, and that they have koalas that, and San Francisco Zoo is one of the only zoos in the country that can have koala bears because their koalas, they're not bears, they're koalas, like the eucalyptus tree at the corner of like 6th and Vallejo. And they have to mark when they cut those trees. They have to mark them down, So I know people think, oh, we're complicated and things like that. We're not that complicated. Animals can be just as complicated. They like certain things, and I don't think people realize that the San Francisco Zoo is really ingrained into the Bay Area, and the vegetation things that we have here. That's the options that we've been able to provide those animals to eat.
No, and I would say that thank you. It gives me time to reflect a little bit, but it's not that we're not concerned and there aren't people at the zoo that are well qualified to think on those levels. We have done a lot with Madagascar. We're going to open up a new Madagascar exhibit at the zoo. But I think it's that thing we want to try to encompass as many people as we possibly can. And there's differences out there. And people go to see attractions in different levels. And one of our newest things that happened at the zoo that really brought a lot of people in about 2 years before the COVID event was we have a new playground, and the kids come in and play on the playground. But we have a Arctic section, a redwood section, and a kapok tree section, and the kids actually play on these things, and it was extremely difficult to get the approval to have these playgrounds done this way because it wasn't a typical playground. If you look at a playground now, all of them look exactly the same, and we went through many iterations with the city to try to build something at the zoo that looked different, and it was different. And we had all these safety measures we had to go through. But the kids go and play on this, and they actually see the different quadrants of things that we have in the Arctic section and things like that. And even that sort of helps with that. And I don't know if that speaks to what you said, but I think I think it's a difference. There's different people, and we have to approach it different ways and try to educate people as much as we can.
And one of the marketing for the San Francisco Zoo is too during the hot summers. That was a ploy, is come and be cool. It's a cool temperature, so that's good.
Yeah, we have new keepers that come to the zoo from San Diego, and they go, "Oh, this is going to be great." And I go, "Yeah, it's 55 all summer, 56 all winter. Wait till September; it'll sweat a little bit."
All right, there was a question.
Yeah, thanks. That's loud. I just wanted to, I don't know if we could add to what someone else said, but I just wanted to add something to you, to what you said. One way that you can personally try to decolonize education around climate change as a non-scientist is by amplifying Indigenous voices. If we think about the groups of people who have actually been successfully practicing regenerative land practices, they've done it for like millenniums. So I think that's one thing you can do on a personal level. And then I have another question, which you kind of touched on, but so I studied public health in undergrad. I just graduated, but I am wondering if there's been, since I know that heightening temperatures raises concerns for zoonotic diseases crossing over to humans, and I mean that's what COVID is. So I'm wondering if there's been more focus on that and trying to just avoid that, or if it just goes in with every other practice is kind of interdisciplinary.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for mentioning indigenous communities. There's an amazing statistic that indigenous communities only occupy, depending on how you cut it, about 5% of the land surface, but 80% of endangered species occur within indigenous lands in one way or the other. And indigenous peoples have demonstrated for thousands of years that they are better at managing biodiversity, but ecology, land than non-indigenous communities are for the most part. And so any solution we have cannot be about removing people and saving it for nature. On the contrary, we absolutely need to engage indigenous communities in any solution that we have. And we're looking for ways to do that wherever we're working. To your question about pandemics, yes, of course, we're going deeper and deeper into wild places, and we're hauling out more and more viruses. So we've increased the odds there. You then raise the temperature and the species move more. So now the parasites and viruses are on the species. And so you've just increased your odds there. And then you raise temperature, and it's yet another factor that we think can have a role in pandemics. And not to scare you all, but there are some people who feel like we may be entering an age of pandemics, that this is not the only one that we're going to be dealing with. And so we'd better get good at handling them and knowing what to do. And we still have so much work to do. And there's been, if you haven't followed the work of Ed Yong, Y-O-N-G, in the Atlantic magazine, he won a Pulitzer for it this year. And he has written phenomenal pieces on our interaction with the virus, the way it's spread, what is likely to happen moving forward, the fact that we haven't done what we need to do to get ready for the next pandemic, etc. So this is something that we need to take seriously on multiple levels. And when you see people, you still hear it. I've just heard it today on the news. People say, well, we can't afford to address pandemics, or we can't afford the kind of climate action. And it's absolutely crazy when you look at what COVID-19 has cost us. I mean, I read one estimate that when all said and done, it'll be like $12 trillion. It's ridiculous. We can't afford not to address these things. When you look at climate and biodiversity, I mean, we're talking about moving into a future where much of the planet is unlivable. That's ridiculous. We have to do what we can, and we know what we need to do. We know even what we have to spend to get it done. We just need the political will to do it. And that's part of creating this movement of youth, diverse youth, to really push this forward. So thanks for bringing that up.
And I think I'll go on a different tangent because I'm not going to speak to the political aspects of this. But what's kind of interesting that people don't see and don't know about is that this disease actually affected zoo animals from people giving it to zoo animals. And that's very, very interesting to me, and to spin it in a totally different way. But we are actually going through our collection and evaluating our most susceptible species and vaccinating them against COVID because people have contact with that. I think and don't quote me, but one of the first cases was a lion or several lions or tigers in Bronx Zoo came down with COVID, correct? Tigers. And what's kind of interesting, which I'm more of an animal person than anything else, and it'd probably be interesting to you, is that why are carnivores getting this disease from us? And it's just, it's very, very interesting to me. So we went through and protected all our carnivores initially, and you would think that primates would be the first thing that we would protect, and we are protecting them. Our chimps have been vaccinated now, and we've been training them, and they come out for voluntary injections, and we vaccinated the gorillas and the chimps and some other species. But those sort of things are kind of really interesting that, you know, we can actually pass it back on to something else, and to think about that. Like it's not just, it doesn't end with us. Yeah. It goes, we're all on this together.
Should we do a couple more questions?
Just had a question and a follow-up. I think there was someone who asked about what the zoos could do to educate our kids, and I feel like we're Battery members. We need to do this. And so I guess my question is, I'm very aware that we need to vote with every dollar, and that whether that's consumer decisions or investment dollars, that we can vote for biodiversity. What do you recommend that this audience do to support your institutions at this time and these movements?
Come to the zoo and the aquarium. I mean,
Well, I spend a good chunk of my life talking about our initiatives and fundraising towards them. We're launching a major capital campaign that's relating to our 3 major initiatives on coral reefs and tropical islands in the state of California. If any of you are interested in learning more about those, I would be very happy to speak with you and see if there is something of interest to you there. This really is a moment unlike any other. And we need to mobilize a lot of people, and we need to mobilize a lot of money, and we have to work collaboratively. We need to move away from the old philanthropic model of just working with single institutions, because single institutions could only do so much. And we have to look at ways to leverage the assets of multiple organizations to get to scale quickly. And that's one of the things that we're working very, very hard to do. So in terms of what you can do, I mean, at the Academy, obviously visiting, we love that. If you want to become a member, we love that. And if you have the capacity to give it a higher level, we'd be thrilled to speak with you about where we're going and what you might be able to accomplish with funds. So thank you.
and if I can add to that, and I'm not 100% sure this is how the Academy functions, but a lot of our operating costs for the zoo is done through gate fees, parking, and our gift store. But anything that we do new, any exhibit we build, anything that has a new initiative, and for the example, that I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, but we're trying to do this connection to the coast and a conservation message, in doing that and putting in a new exhibit to build in front of the zoo and eliminate half our parking lot so that we can connect to the ocean somehow. And those funds all come from donations from people. They don't come from the gate fees. They don't come from things. They actually come from, there's a different level, and we seek that all the time. And the interesting thing, I've been here 25 years, is that I think there's a lot of money in San Francisco. If I'm not right, correct me, but and some of these things that we try to do, it's just, we definitely seek that out and try to figure out how we can produce something really, really cool, to do something. Was working at some point on trying to bring back polar bears to an exhibit at the zoo. And we had a very old 1945 exhibit that our polar bears were in. And to do something new, to step from there to something new, I would guess, to throw a number out there, to build a state-of-the-art polar bear exhibit in that space would be $40 to $50 million, easy. No problem. And it would involve doing some kind of jacuzzi lap pool so polar bears could swim. It would involve doing all these things, that trying to get, like, what you can't keep a polar bear in a 4x8 concrete enclosure anymore. You have to be able to produce something, and that costs. That kind of innovation is extreme, and you know what I'm talking about. It's just anything he does new or anything I do new. We invent it from the bottom up, and it takes a lot of time and effort to be able to do things. There's a lot of changes. We're like, oh my God, I didn't think about that. We have to change that. We have to change this for the exhibit. We're building different things, and that sort of innovation to try to do those sorts of things is expensive anywhere, but even more expensive in San Francisco. And it's just, that's what we need. We need people who want to blow something out of the park. And it's kind of interesting, because I've been in this, I'm like, oh yeah, we could do something, but we need something to do that. And those sort of funds come from a collection of donors that were able to do something like that.
And then the other thing I was going to, and I don't know, you might even want to talk about this, is just the looking at corporations these days and the nexus of what's happening with the environmental social governance reports and things that these companies are doing. And I think a lot of companies are also looking to see what they can do. And we want to make sure that there's not blue or greenwashing. So we want to encourage companies that either you're investing in and things like that, see what are they doing for the environment? How are they hurting the environment? But to also look at these institutions and possibly partner with the institutions to help fund what they're doing and do corporate sponsorships and things like that. I think there's a great opportunity now that that's opened up for people to look at.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a comment and a question. I was thinking about the pandemics. Not only do we have to get better at trying to combat pandemics for ourselves, but I also think we need to take into account pandemics for animal species. So, for example, if you think about, hoof disease of elk and bighorn sheep, or if you think about the neurologic brain disease for moose in the Northeast, I think it's a white fungus for the bats. There's lots of things that are actually happening to our species that I think aren't on our radar quite as much. So pandemic for us, but also pandemic for species. My question is on the advocacy part, what is the short list that we can do as advocates?
So there's a lot of people who think of advocacy, or they think about action in terms of what they can do as individuals. What you drive, how much you fly, what you eat. And I'm not trying to say those aren't important, because they are. But the reality is we could all give up flying and driving and eat vegetarian, and we'd still be going to hell in a handbasket. So what's needed is collective action. And so anything that you can do to get involved with collective action, even if that means talking about the fact that you've gone vegan or you don't fly anymore or whatever that might be, that's more powerful than individual action. And we need to stop blaming each other and trying to guilt each other on whether we're pure in what we're doing, and instead start collaborating on making a difference. So supporting politicians that are making the right kinds of decisions about the future of the earth, helping organizations that are driving movements, helping organizations that are driving conservation, helping organizations that are trying to accelerate the energy transition towards renewables. All these are really, really important, and any of them would be wonderful for you to get involved in. So look for those things that sort of fit your area of passion. We sort of do three major activities now at the Academy. We do science, largely focused on the web of life. We do education, primarily environmental learning. And then we've got this new thing, collaboration. And we see the Academy as becoming a center for convening, that safe place for dangerous ideas. Where else do you go to even talk about these issues right now? And so you're going to be seeing more from us, bringing people together to try and lift the understanding of the fact that we are all deeply embedded in nature. Like scientifically, there is no way of other way of putting it. There are more cells in your body that aren't human cells than there are human cells. You are less than half human. That's a bizarre thing to say, but these are microbes that are in you, on you, through you, and we all have them, right? And you need them. They do digestion, they make your immune system, they do all these things. We are walking colonies. That's what we are. There are more living things on you than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So you are deeply embedded in nature. And if we didn't understand that before, my gosh, we better understand it with COVID-19, that we're so embedded in nature that somebody can go and haul a virus out of a forest in China and it infects the whole of humanity. So think about these collective things you can do, and I think then you're on the right track.
And I guess the only thing I can add to that would be partnerships. and to build partnerships or support people that are in partnerships with other people, because it's a collaborative effort. There's no one organization that's going to figure it out. It's got to be a partnership with a lot of different people. And if you should build partnerships and think about it, it's just not one. It's not just the academy. It's not just the zoo. It's not just one thing you're going to support. You have to support more than that, or try to find an organization that builds partnerships with other organizations to try to solve things, because solving things is not a small, minute area anymore. It's worldwide, and that's what we're dealing with. I think it's just the world is a lot smaller place than it was when I was born.
I think we had another question over here. Okay, so we'll come up and ask the question too, if you'd like to. So what we did was I started the Battery Earth started a LinkedIn group. So if you want to get on there and ask questions, we can put you in contact with Scott and Eric up here with any kind of ideas or anything that's generating in your mind of, I'd like to meet like-minded people. How can we get this started? We have some questions and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to end it now, because I'm sure that you have some one-on-one questions that you'd like to ask them. I also wanted to introduce Fatih in case you have any questions about Battery Earth. And then there are 2 people here from the Academy. I'm going to raise your hands. I just went blank your names. It's yeah, great. So thank you so much. And please, we hope this is just the beginning of ideas and things.
From the zoo here too.
Oh, we do?
Tim? Actually, we have a couple. I'm Tim Wu. I'm the VP of Philanthropy.
Tim,
at the
hi.
zoo.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
And Margaret Calvin, Rosemary Baker, 2 of our board members.
Oh, hello. Well, thank you so much. We're so glad that you guys could be here. I didn't recognize you behind your
So I'm
mask.
gonna run to them and hug them when
Thank you so much. So we hope this is the beginning of conversations, and we were saying relationships and things like that. We'll let you know when there are things happening at the zoo and the California Academy. Thank you.
Thank you all for